Flash games are an untethered art form where creators are rarely beholden to the demands of publishers, distributors, customers, or anyone who might restrict what makes the final cut of the game. While more risque content, themes, and presentations risk the creator's ability to ever make money off their game, the vast majority of Flash games never made substantial profits regardless. So many developers treated Flash first and foremost as a format for demoing concepts, telling personal stories, and other means of artistic expression. With quick development turnarounds and a no-holds-barred approach, plenty of Flash games have pushed the envelope on what could be considered acceptable to a general audience looking to quickly kill some time. Several of these games took things far enough to garner mainstream media attention, sparking outrages, national news coverage, spiraling lawsuits, and worse. These are 5 of the most controversial Flash games ever released. I'm warning you now, this video can get a little heavy. If after this video you're left looking for some good but less than wholesome fun, then I ask that you please check out the Repellafella prologue. This is a game I am publishing coming out next year, but I truly felt that the best way to sell people on this game is to have them play it. This prologue is about the first hour of the game, designed to be replayed up to 3 times. It's a point-and-click choose-your-own adventure introducing you to the game, and I all but guarantee that once you get your hands on it, you're going to love it. I'll have a link to that down below. Please go check it out and share your honest thoughts with us in the Steam reviews. And if you enjoy it, please be sure to wishlist the full game. How's it going, everyone? Welcome to 2 Left Thumbs. My name's Graham, and this is Flashlight, the series where I look at all things Flash related. You may have noticed right away I ended that intro with 5 of the most rather than the top 5. First, I'm leaving that window open for myself in case the comments flood with great suggestions of controversial games I overlooked. But second, there are some top contenders I am choosing to omit from this video. Pico's School is one of the most obvious choices. It's about a young student stopping a school shooting by shooting up the school. Throw in heaps of gore, drug use, plenty of sexual references, including a giant alien hanging dong. And yeah, this game turned some heads. While it was in many ways an example of the best that could be achieved with Flash 3 programming at the time, its subject matter was much more divisive. Some appreciated the satirical nature and blatant absurdism, but as you might expect, not all were receptive to its violent nature and heavy themes. However, I already did a video covering this game and its history, so it only gets an honorable mention here instead. I'll leave a link down below and a card in the top right if you want to check that out as well. There are plenty of other games that check off boxes of gore, crude themes, sexual content, mean-spirited attacks, and 1,000 other offensive inclusions. Shock value was a big deal in the early days of Flash. It was a major way to get noticed and have people talk about your game in an era where word of mouth was still the best way for anything to be spread around. So while series like Dead Baby Dress Up, Whack Your Boss, or Frank's Adventure are all intended for a mature audience, they did not incite much controversy. The games that made the news sparked debates and in several cases had their presence wiped clean from much of the internet, usually came down to games based on real people or events, created not just to shock but appall the player. With that in mind, proceed with caution as these games touch on serious subjects and were designed to get a rise from you. Starting off at number 5 with a game that wasn't recreating any specific event, we had Kindergarten Killer. This one came about in 2002, first uploaded to Newgrounds and the personal website of its creator, Gary Short. It's a simple concept of storming a school in a first-person perspective, shooting kids until you can fight through to the principal. As becomes a bit of a norm in this video, this one was made by an 18-year-old trying to leave their mark and make a name for themselves with something intentionally controversy-driven. Fast forward to 2012, a full decade later. In the wake of the Sandy Hook school shootings, the NRA blamed violent video games for the upteenth time. Their executive vice president, Wayne LaPierre, specifically cited the usual suspects of Grand Theft Auto and Mortal Kombat, as well as popular games like Bulletstorm and Splatterhouse. And in a wildly unexpected move, he directly drew attention to a little-known Flash game.
And here's one. It's called Kindergarten Killers. It's been online for 10 years.
Pardon the pun, but LaPierre tried to use this as some sort of smoking gun. That the buried existence of this game revealed a dirty little truth in the industry and the culture, claiming that despite being online for 10 years,
how come my research staff can find it and all of yours couldn't or didn't want anyone to know you had found it?
He's trying to claim that this Flash game is some best-kept secret that is to blame for increasing levels of violence across the country. This was the game he decided was a secret leading culprit? Pico's School was an older and far more popular game based on school shootings. He strangely, specifically went hunting for something more obscure. Honestly, kudos to his research team for digging up this game that was never highly regarded or overly well received. Creator Gary Short even described it on his personal site as being created to appeal to an edgier side of Newgrounds' audience after failing to otherwise be noticed. At one point, I tried pandering to the Newgrounds crowd to get more hits and better Flash movie scores, but I became sick of it. Kindergarten Killer was pretty popular though, and got me loads of visitors, and still does. Outside of illegal content, blatantly hateful submissions, or cases of copyright infringement, there are very few games Newgrounds creator Tom Fulp has personally removed from his site over the years. While Kindergarten Killer is no longer available on Newgrounds, it was actually Gary Short himself who asked Tom to delete his account alongside all his submissions. He appears to no longer respond to messages in regards to this game or any others he made, understandably wanting to distance himself from it and the surrounding controversy even a decade later. Funnily enough, the game first came into hot water even before the headline-worthy 2012 callout. It was first quietly removed from a Finnish site in 2008 following another school shooting in Finland, but it didn't gain much additional attention at that time. Overall, I categorize this one as a weaker controversy. While it made headlines, it didn't seem like anyone other than Wayne LaPierre actually cared. By 2012, we had really eclipsed the worst of the violence in games rhetoric. It has never left, but at least it was no longer the only thing these people pointed to. Look at a case like lawyer Jack Thompson, an infamous anti-video games activist who in 2008 was disbarred and no longer allowed to practice law, with the Florida Supreme Court determining that his filings were repetitious, frivolous, and insulting to the integrity of the court. If Florida is calling your opinions outdated, you know you're on the wrong side of a debate. And here this guy was, blaming online Flash games 4 years after that. The National Rifle Association would never be caught dead blaming guns for gun violence, so they resorted to blaming a relatively unknown browser game made 10 years earlier. The use of such an obvious scapegoat was ludicrous and almost feels more controversial than the game itself. Number 4. Back in April 2007, creator Seaman released The Torture Game, supposedly being inspired by some of Ed McMillan's Dead Baby games that were popular at the time. Seaman was also 18 at the time and living in South Africa. The Torture Game is extra cartoony with a few simple options, some of which can still give you a bit of the heebie-jeebies. Think of Interactive Buddy, but instead of bashing up this cute little ball man, you are instead violently inflicting pain upon an actual person. There is no objective, only pain. You can dunk the androgynous human in acid, poke them with a knife, run a big spear through them, or scrape them up with a razor. The last one especially grosses me out. However, it's made notably less gross through glitchy emulated versions of the game you may encounter online nowadays, where the person is replaced with this blank white square. Yeah, it's a lot less offensive when you're essentially giving a sheet of paper a cut. Really, I think anybody could get on board with that sort of paper-cutting revenge concept. That original game never made much of a splash. It wasn't until 1 year later, in May 2008, when the Torture Game 2 was released. Then the controversy began. The sequel took on a notably more realistic art style and added many new options. Even simply clicking and dragging the ragdoll person shows off the more advanced physics, becoming even more twisted as soon as you start placing nails to hold things in place, with any damage inflicted remaining after. One eerie quality is that this person never screams or reacts to anything we're doing. I think that would have been a very different game, one that read as something more sadistic and maybe would have warranted the attention it received. I really can't show a lot of this game because I suspect much of the gore and violent imagery likely exceeds YouTube's tolerable limits. So what if we just replace the blood with some blueberry juice? That might do the trick. Nothing upsetting about that, eh? Each tool has a list of ways you can make use of it. Some of them are actually pretty damn impressive feats of programming, like the physics of attaching things with a rope, then shortening and lengthening the rope while it's attached. That simple tool is the sort of thing that would normally be the foundations of an entire Flash game, while others, like the razor, are much more sickening. Layers of skin and tissue were added to the character, meaning that every different way you torture this man reveals varying amounts and depths of blood and viscera. I mean, blueberry juice and jam. Honestly, things like the chainsaw are pretty cool. It's complex to make the game in a way where anything can be cut nearly anywhere with proper physics. The way it all goes limp or splatters juice around is twisted, yet I have to admire how well it realized what it set out to accomplish. The game went mostly unnoticed at first, only being front-paged about a month after release, eventually garnering enough attention to be one of the 21 games nominated for the 2008 Newgrounds Tank Awards. In the end, it lost to Fancy Pants Adventures World 2. I have a video exploring the history of the Fancy Pants series, including an interview with the series creator. If you need a palate cleanse with something more wholesome after this video, that could be a solid option. This game went from being almost entirely overlooked at first to accumulating 16 million views, making it the 9th most played game of all time on Newgrounds. Derek Yu, now most well known for founding Mossmouth and creating Spelunky, was the editor-in-chief of TIG Source and shared the game with his readership. While some enjoyed it, there were many who shared their distaste and vowed to never return to TIG Source again. The Torture Game 2 was largely defended as being escapism, an artistic exploration, or as being yet another silly time waster that happened to be a little bloody. This game was picked up by and discussed by the likes of MSNBC and Fox News. The MSNBC author, Winda Benedetti, was rather reasonable, understanding the because I could part of the game that appealed to many's base curiosities. While Fox made this cringy news piece that makes the same weak and tired arguments against violence in video games.
It is free, it is online, and it allows kids to torture.
And there's no objective except to
Right, there's no objective. You don't get
do
points.
whatever you
It's
want.
just to torture. That's
Right.
the fun of the game.
Winda actually reached out to Seaman to get a developer perspective. Some standout quotes include, "I never thought of it as a stress reliever. The only thing I meant it to be was something simple and pointless, meant only for entertainment." Seaman had no interest in becoming an actual game developer, and shared, "I don't mind people disliking my game. but some of them are too serious about something so simple and basically meaningless. As additional sites like Game Politics, Discover Magazine, and more began to pick it up, they simply exposed the game to a greater and wider audience. As with almost all games on this list, the Streisand effect was in full force. For anyone unfamiliar, the Streisand effect is a phenomenon named after Barbara Streisand, who attempted to suppress a photo taken of her home in Malibu, while the photo itself was only taken to document coastal erosion. Instead of erasing the photograph, she simply drew mass attention to it, and subsequently the home she was trying to keep private. As Tom Fulp pointed out in a news post in regards to the torture game's newfound attention, the real fun came when Fox News weighed in with a fair and balanced video expressing their disgust while showing real-time footage of the person being tortured. Hey, at least we slapped a mature rating on the game and made you click a link to view it. Fox just dumped it into every living room in America.
It puts your child in the driver's seat to torture a make-believe hanging person with anything from a chainsaw to a razor blade. I mean, it's disgusting, Melissa. But others say, look, it's just a game.
Seaman actually remade this sequel in Unity as the torture game 2X back in April 2020. It's the same basic game made in a new engine, but between more violent games existing these days, the news paying less attention to online games, and it being a retread of an old controversy, this remake didn't gain the same negative attention as the previous installment. It isn't all bad, as some users actually made it a personal challenge to create something beautiful within the confines of the game, painting scenes through the violence of the game to create entirely original pieces like these. So while this game garnered a lot of media attention, the controversy maybe wasn't that deep. It offended everyone who you would expect it would offend, and it kind of fizzled out from there. Number 3. The back end of this list ramps things up a bit. The remaining 3 in this list earn their controversies by being directly linked to real people and events. Anita Sarkeesian is a feminist media critic and public speaker, most well known for founding Feminist Frequency, which commentates on the portrayals of women in pop culture. Anita had launched a Kickstarter campaign to fund a series of videos examining gender tropes in video games. That sounds like a perfectly legitimate concept for a video series. Women are often underrepresented in video games, or when they are present, are often reduced to tropes or presented through a misogynistic lens. That's unfortunately true in just about any media, and games are far from being an exception. However, Anita has often come under fire for misrepresenting points, ignoring in-game context, poor research, assuming the worst of developers, and blindly hating on games. Just to quickly dispel the notion that everyone dislikes her simply for speaking her mind. It's largely, instead, that she has bad, unsupported opinions and often factually incorrect arguments. Launching her campaign started a bit of a war, with haters attempting to hack her accounts, flooding her social media pages with threats of rape and death, disparaging her anywhere they could. Even if people do dislike her work, this was an abhorrent reaction that nobody deserves. That vicious hate drew new eyes, allowing supporters to find her campaign and boost it from its $6,000 goal all the way up to just shy of $160,000. That's 2,648% of the intended goal. While I'm sure those threats were not easy for Anita to bear, she appears to have gotten the last laugh in that sense. In the wake of this hate wave, about 3 weeks after the Kickstarter that started it all had ended, we saw the release of Beat Up Anita Sarkeesian. For a bit of context, back in the earliest days of Newgrounds, some of the most common and most popular games came from the Assassin series. These were small, widget-like games where players could inflict pain upon just about any celebrity or fictional character you could imagine. It was a trend that quickly grew beyond the official releases, spawning many fan contributions featuring the likes of Britney Spears, Madonna, the Backstreet Boys, the Taco Bell dog, Jigglypuff, Furby, and on and on. Tom Fulp described the Assassin series and its fan-made clones as the backbone of Newgrounds in those early days, with fans tuning in regularly to see who was on the chopping block next. The very first of these, coming directly from Tom, were made strictly through limited HTML programming, then JavaScript, and finally upgrading to Flash. I'd love to do a history video on that series someday, as it's a fascinating relic of the early internet and Newgrounds specifically, but because it dates back so far, so much of it isn't readily available anymore. So I'd only do that video if I could get a hold of as many of those files as possible. Anywho, back on topic, Beat Up Anita Sarkeesian was a throwback to those games, coming in July 2012. Either times have changed and people are less tolerant of this sort of casual violence, maybe it's just easier than ever to share around these games and therefore less likely for them to go unnoticed. Or perhaps it read as the creator punching down. Most likely, it turned heads because of its more realistic approach. Regardless of why, within only a day, it had been picked up by news outlets like Kotaku, The New Statesman, and Huffington Post, with the game promptly bringing on its own flood of hate and being axed off of Newgrounds. I reached out to Tom Fulp simply to make sure I had that timeline correct, as it appeared to have spun out so quickly. He shared it was published on Newgrounds and immediately had an article on Kotaku that same afternoon, which made me paranoid the whole thing was a plant to generate publicity at Newgrounds' expense. Like, Newgrounds was an easy scapegoat to both generate outrage on Anita's behalf and get clicks for Kotaku. I think I would have removed it regardless, because at this point I didn't want Newgrounds to be a hellhole, and it felt outside of the playful scope of classic Assassin games. I did get the impression years later that it was made by some regular guy and wasn't some sort of orchestrated publicity stunt. The game was uploaded with the message, "There's been a disgusting large imbalance of men who get beaten up in games. Let's add a lady to help balance things." While a satirical approach playing up that angle, dunking on Anita's arguments rather than her, could have been funny, the game instead leans into a more realistic and mean-spirited presentation, and the absurdist nature of those old Assassin games was totally lost. It's hard to say if the game was made in good faith or intended to be fun, but if that were the case, the creator likely wouldn't have posted it with the added text, "Anita Sarkeesian has not only scammed thousands of people out of over $160,000, but also uses the excuse that she is a woman to get away with whatever she damn well pleases." That feels a lot more like a butthurt internet troll with an axe to grind, rather than someone trying to provide meaningful commentary on either women or violence in video games. However, years later, Anita admitted to not being a fan of video games or considering herself a gamer.
I'm not a fan of video games. I actually had to learn a lot about video games in the process of making this.
So in that regard, it could be argued that she lied to her audience, and her campaign was, on at least some level, a scam. That doesn't justify the creation of this game, but it does make some sense of that specific statement from the creator. This simple story could have ended there, but it oddly managed to spin out well beyond that. Toronto activist Stephanie Guthrie decided to seek out the creator of the game for an interview. She quickly and easily found Ben Bendelin Spur, using the same pseudonym on Newgrounds and Twitter, then openly blasting him. While many supported her quest to get in touch with Ben and have him answer for the creation of this game, others took it upon themselves to fight Bendelin's battle for him, thus sparking a whole new harassment campaign now against Stephanie. To me, she perhaps shares some blame for feeding the trolls, and for approaching this as aggressively as she did, with the hate and insults now pouring in from both sides. Although I'm confident anything slung her way would have been far nastier than anyone deserved. This went so far that Guthrie and a man, Gregory Allen Elliott, got so heated in their debates that it eventually went to court, with the final verdict of that being that Gregory was innocent. There are reports that Bendelin was fired from his job after this and hadn't been able to find full-time employment for quite some time after. I never found any real confirmation if he ever got past that. It's a messy situation via harassment occurring on both sides, with careers and livelihoods being destroyed along the way. Two people fighting online going to court for arguing over a game about beating up a woman in response to a woman's intended video series on women being treated poorly in video games feels like the internet's own little circle of life, doesn't it? Number 2. We're now moving in to what are easily the heaviest items on this list. If anything has made you squeamish or felt distasteful thus far, then I would say maybe these two are going to exceed your threshold. But if you've been watching the whole time thinking, what's the big deal about any of these, then maybe these last two will change your tune. This is actually a two-part story that will occupy both the number 2 and number 1 spots on the list, centering on a singular, callous, remorseless developer who tried not once but twice to capitalize on national tragedies.
And to prove it, I shall break some laws.
At least at the time of this first game, the guy was a troll, creating these games for their shock value only, hoping to offend as many people as possible, and on the rare occasion he's agreed to an interview, he blatantly baits the interviewers seeking to get further reactions. Perhaps he's changed his tune nowadays. I'm sure many of us regret choices we made in our early 20s, but rarely is that the consequence of something so seemingly hateful and vile. The first part of this story is V-Tech Rampage, which came from the 21-year-old amateur developer Ryan Jake Lambourne, known on Newgrounds as Pigpen. V-Tech Rampage released in May 2007, just 1 month after the Virginia Tech shooting, which saw the deaths of 33 individuals, including the gunman.
A parent's worst nightmare, a student's worst nightmare, the deadliest campus shooting in U.S. history.
The game starts off with the shootings of Emily Hilscher and Ryan Clark, the first 2 victims in the real-life shooting. From there, you must make it safely across campus to barricade yourself in and shoot as many victims as possible in 90 seconds. There is the option to talk to students along the way, with the dialogue often being riddled with obscenities, racial slurs, and other explicit material. Ryan has been on record describing himself as a heartless bastard who was perfectly content laughing at the hypocrisy of everyone and taking my title as Troll of the Year. And did it so me and my friends and people like me and my friends could have a laugh. The hypocrisy he is referring to was that everyone was outraged by his game, yet continued to share it and raise awareness for it because the controversy made for titillating news. In that regard, he may have actually had a point. With the backlash the game received, Ryan sought to cash in on the anger he had stirred up, sharing on his site, "Attention angry people. I will take this game down from Newgrounds if the donation amount reaches $1,000 US. I'll take it down from my website if it reaches $2,000, and I will apologize if it reaches $3,000. Later adding, "The donation thing is there as a joke against all the people commanding me to take down my game. I don't think anyone would donate money to it, and so far my PayPal account has proven me right." I asked Tom Fulp about this game's continued presence on Newgrounds, to which he replied, "V-Tech Rampage was actually uploaded while I was on my honeymoon. This was one of the only times in my life where I wasn't checking in on Newgrounds, so it's hard to say if things would have been different. But I likely would have left it alone at the time because I did feel a lot of pressure to be a free and open platform. There was a gradual slide towards me no longer feeling the responsibility to host everyone's stuff. It's a pressure that has plagued Tom for many years, knowing that Newgrounds was founded on controversial material like the Pico and Assassin series. In the years since, he has more readily taken down content that was explicitly made to offend or infuriate. You can still get away with a lot on Newgrounds, much more than YouTube, hence why it relies on its own Patreon-like donation system to remain afloat, as very few advertisers have remained willing to be featured on the site. Which, FYI, in case you want to check out the Newgrounds supporter option, a subscription can either be $3 a month or $25 once a year. It makes the site entirely ad-free as well as a plethora of other bonuses. Considering the insane server costs of that site, and the fact that it has remained committed to creators over advertisers, means the site hasn't really been profitable for a lot of years, and I would recommend paying to support it to anyone who has ever or currently does frequent the site. I just feel I should do my part and make sure people are aware that that option is out there. While V-Tech Rampage has never been fully removed from Newgrounds, it was at one point in time threatened to be removed by the RIAA for the use of copyrighted music in the menu. This takedown notice was delivered to Newgrounds, with Tom then informing Pigpen of this development. Ryan uploaded a new version of the game with a replaced soundtrack and menu screen. Honestly, in opposition to everything else scummy and vile this game and developer have done, this was a pretty genuinely funny middle finger to the RIAA.
Hey, fuck the RIAA, hey, fuck.
The game drew national attention, with New York Senator Andrew Lanza stating, "There are certain things in life you don't make light of and should not be turning into a game. It's not a game, it's a tremendous loss of life." And the Australian Minister of Communications, Senator Helen Coonan, planned to launch an official investigation, stating, "The individual responsible for the game is using a terrible tragedy to draw attention to himself and his work. It is in very poor taste, and the person concerned may want to consider getting some professional help." Ryan participated in an interview with the Sydney Morning Herald, sharing that he had sympathy for the victims and loved ones of the massacre, but that he was also sympathetic to the gunman. "No one listens to you unless you've got something sensational to do," he added, "and that's why I feel sympathy for Cho Sung-hee. He had to go that far." While that feels like this game maybe had something to say, V-Tech Rampage was criticized by Danny Ledone, the developer of a 2005 RPG Maker title that recreated another mass shooting, Super Columbine Massacre RPG, which would have come just a few years earlier. While Danny's game drew the same criticisms as V-Tech Rampage for recreating a horrific real-world event, potentially trying to capitalize for personal gains, that one did actually receive praise for a strong narrative, presenting the mental and emotional complexity of the gunman, its commentary on violence in video games and the American way of life, among many other artistic values laced into the game. Ledone viewed V-Tech Rampage unfavorably, suggesting players to consider not whether a game about the Virginia Tech shooting should be made, but how we might go about making a game that accomplishes more than V-Tech Rampage does with the subject matter. Journalists at Blog, Critics, and Kotaku agreed with Ladon's assessment. The game is riddled with embarrassing typographical errors, the ridiculous screens that follow failure are beyond pathetic, and the choice of music is sure to cause copyright issues. It's a sad cry for attention and a miserable use of a tragedy in an attempt to reach that goal. V-Tech Rampage doesn't bring anything more than shoddy, tacky gameplay to the table. Free speech and free expression are great. Just make sure you've got something to say. Through another interview, this time with Destructoid, it feels more obvious that Ryan Lambourne created V-Tech Rampage without any attempt at adding anything artistic, or going anywhere near the lengths Ladon had gone to approach Columbine seriously, delicately, with nuance, and having something to say. Ryan instead shared, "I just made the game as a recreation of the events as I knew it, as best detailed as I could in the short game form, and added jokes of course for lulz factor." What a cool guy, eh? He tried to make the argument that it was a good thing he made the game when he did. I'm paraphrasing, but the argument was that, over time, the families of the victims would have mental scabs, and releasing this game later would have opened old wounds. I don't see that as my need to wait for them to build up a tolerance to pain. His rationale was that by instead releasing it quickly, it meant it would coincide with the strong emotional reaction they were already experiencing, and may help others empathize with their situation. Then claiming that his game was art, because it was something to experience, rather than just play. If you ever try to give it a look, his interview with Destructoid is a mind-numbing cocktail of self-aggrandizing political rants, cringy internet humor, mixed with a few small moments of lucidity. I'd say it zaps a lot of credibility out of his words when in that very same interview he also said, "Making so many angry has won me enough points for the rest of my life." I don't think that can be interpreted as this game having been made in good faith or attempting to contribute to the healing process. But as I set up before, the story doesn't end there. Which brings us to number 1. What I consider to be the most controversial Flash game of all time. Years after V-Tech Rampage, Pigpen returned to recreate another school shooting. This time, his game was released just shy of a year after the real-life event. So he at least wasn't trying to capitalize on these events immediately, suggesting on some level he may have been trying to be more sympathetic to the victims. Now 27 years old, Ryan Lambourne posted the slaying of Sandy Hook on Newgrounds and his personal site. While the controversy surrounding the kindergarten killer also spawned from this event, I saved any specifics for now, as they apply much more directly to this game. In December 2012, at the Sandy Hook Elementary School in Newton, Connecticut, we had the tragedy of the Sandy Hook school shooting. It is the deadliest elementary school shooting in US history. It's one of the most awful, sickening shootings ever committed, and the aftermath can still be felt rippling through the nation, opening many conversations on school security, gun control, mental health, and more. It's an event that has affected innumerable people, and is a subject that should not be taken lightly. It may feel that I've minimized other school shooting-based games like Pico's School for its absurdist and satirical nature, or even Kindergarten Killer for being an edgy product produced by a teenager that came before school shootings had reached an epidemic level across America. While it doesn't make those games immune to criticism, it does add some context as to why they weren't seen as immediately as tasteless as Lambourne's work. Pico's School and Kindergarten Killer were not based on real events, only inspired by. And an elementary school mass shooting like Sandy Hook had never been seen before, which dramatically recontextualizes the subject matter of those games. Unlike V-Tech Rampage, the slaying of Sandy Hook is presented with a surrealist style that lessens the visual impact of this recreation. However, it was still crafted to present the story as literally as possible. putting the player in the shoes of assailant Adam Lanza, playing out the exact events of him executing his mother that morning, traveling to school, then spending 10 minutes at the school, rampaging its halls, kicking in doors, shooting students, then ending with Adam's real-life suicide. The interesting thing is that while this game has been widely dismissed for its grisly subject matter and literal translation of those events, beating the game unlocks an alternate gun control mode. While it's certainly not a deep or nuanced bit of commentary, the game instead plays out with Adam's mother stabbed to death, failing to open her gun safe, and instead acting out the Sandy Hook Rampage armed with a katana. At the time of this release in 2013, Lamborn reflected on his own views of gun regulations and how they compare between Australia and America.
I grew up in Houston, Texas, where I remember guns and ammunition being available, in unmanned sections of Walmart. And, just it being commonplace to hear gunshots in the distance as I tried to go to sleep, which is a stark contrast to Sydney, Australia, where I moved to in 2001.
He even goes so far as to include links for people to educate themselves and to get in touch with various politicians in order to express their support for increased gun control. I'm from Canada and have seen similar benefits as he has in Australia to restricting access to firearms. I'll include links down below to do the same, and if anyone can suggest any other additional links and resources I could provide to maybe help have our voices be heard and our outcry against gun violence and school shootings, please do let me know. While discussing some of these titles with Tom Fulp, he shared a personal take on Pigpen and this pair of shocking games. After V-Tech and Sandy Hook, people probably think Ryan's a prototypical far-right internet troll, but he's actually super liberal nowadays from what I've seen. When Sandy Hook came out and had the message about gun laws, I was sure that it was part of the troll, like the game was pretending to care about gun laws as a way to own libs who speak out against it. Looking back now, I still think that might have been part of it, but I also think Pigpen was going through his own human evolution. We all do in our own way. While the game appears to have something to say on gun control and violence, it doesn't mean Ryan had suddenly become a deeply empathetic person who could suddenly grasp the way his games may have negatively affected others. Shortly after the game's release, he picked a fight with Donna Soto on Twitter, the mother of Vicky Soto, who died in Sandy Hook trying to serve as a human shield to protect her students. Donna Soto shared, "It's absolutely disgusting that somebody thinks this is funny. And we're all suffering. All the families are suffering. We're coming up on December. My daughter's birthday just passed. It just adds insult to the suffering that we're dealing with. It's just incomprehensible that someone would think this kind of thing is wanted." The decision for this game to be removed from Newgrounds was one site creator Tom Fulp did not take lightly. Considering he himself created Pico's School and had never removed V-Tech Rampage or the Torture game series, he made a post titled Censorship, which eloquently explains how Newgrounds has stood up for its creators for many years, while also being strict on topics of homophobia and racism. He found this decision especially difficult, because this time the game held artistic merit and shared an important message on gun control. He closed it out with the statement, "Newgrounds has faced harsh criticism in the past for standing firm on not censoring distasteful material, namely games about school shootings. All I can say is that this game took things to a new level in terms of the age of the victims and the realism of the terror they faced on that day. I was personally contacted by Sandy Hook parents, and they expressed their understanding of what the game was attempting to communicate, but also expressed the sadness and horror it made them feel, and their desire to have it removed. Today, I'm choosing respect for the Sandy Hook parents over respect for Newgrounds' censorship policies. Either decision on this matter puts a knot in my stomach. Ryan tweeted out to Tom Falp following the takedown. "I don't agree with your decision and can't be using Newgrounds again out of principle, but that couldn't possibly change my opinion of you. And I just want to make sure you know I don't hate you. I respect you, enjoy your work, and you've had a huge positive impact in my life." Regardless of what Ryan wanted to say with his game, how his current views may have evolved, or his attempts to add artistic value, the slaying of Sandy Hook carried the baggage of the backlash he received for V-Tech Rampage, and still crossed a line that many were unable to support, and quite rightfully was taken down. So I find it almost inarguable that this pair of games have earned their place as the most controversial Flash games of all time. As I'm closing things out, I would hate for anyone's takeaway from this video to be that Newgrounds is a hellhole harboring nothing but these detestable works. In Tom's own words, that is part of where the sense of responsibility came from. We were the first place to do real-time publishing, and it felt important not to gatekeep. So while it was possible for these works to be shared on Newgrounds, it doesn't mean that they inherently support all of these. And while there is still to this day plenty uploaded to that site that would not be at home on YouTube for a wide variety of reasons, or most other sites for that matter, it is far from what makes Newgrounds special. I predict that this entire video focusing on controversial topics means that it will garner some additional interest through a certain degree of morbid curiosity many of us share. While I have 20 other videos in this Flashlight series that have had varying degrees of success and failure, the eye-catching nature of a video like this I think serves as a perfect analogy for something that lies at the heart of Newgrounds. It gets remembered for the outrageous moments and not for the vast amount of great things that are largely ignored day to day. Tom threw out a specific example of this. When Phoenotopia came out in 2014, I messaged all of the gaming press people I could find, and no one wrote about it. It has since gotten coverage for the eventual Switch and Steam versions. Newgrounds had hosted this gem of a game for 7 years before it found any mainstream success. It is a site that has hundreds of thousands of animations and games waiting to be discovered, encapsulating decades of the very best and brightest minds and talents from across the globe. These are the sort of gems you'll stumble across in any given week just looking at the front page of the site. But if you really give it some time, there is more quality content there than you can probably ever see in a lifetime. So while yes, people remember the shocking content, the reason Newgrounds has endured, and why its legacy extends well beyond so many other sites that have come and gone, is because of the quality content that exists in droves. So please don't think that this is all Newgrounds is good for. The fact that any of these games have ever been featured there are simply a testament to its creator-friendly attitude. But do know it does have limits. I hope this video didn't bum people out too hard. If you do choose to watch more Flashlight videos, I promise you that the other 20 of them are much more lighthearted. So that could be a good way to unwind after this. I'll remind you once again that Repellafella is coming to Steam. Please check out the free prologue that is available right now and give the full game a wish list. Let Steam know you're interested. That helps us out immensely. While the game has edgy humor and graphic content, I do want to clarify that there's nothing in it meant to upset you. It's just damn good fun, filled with laughs, and so carefully and lovingly crafted. That's what drew me to the game, and I know you'll love that about it as well. If you can think of games that are more controversial than these, then let me know. If we can come up with some more major news stories or anything like that, I'll happily make a follow-up video. But in the meantime, thank you all so much for watching, thank you to patrons of the channel, and I'll see you all again